in Hong Kong have occupied the territory's Legislative Council building. But in the last few minutes, the Hong Kong police have warned they intend to clear the building, quote, in a short period of time. We'll get the view from Beijing in a few moments, but let's begin in Hong Kong first. Our correspondent Wayne Hay is inside the Legislative Council building with the protesters. Andrew Thomas is on the streets outside the building. We'll go to Andrew in a moment, but first, Wayne Hay, who is inside that building. So, Wayne, tell us what is happening there now, and what are they getting any word there about the warning from the police that they are ready to go in?
Yes, Hazem, extraordinary scenes. It was around 2 hours ago now that they breached the outer walls, the perimeter of this building. They had spent much of Monday really trying to smash their way through reinforced glass windows and doors, trying to really what we thought was make a symbolic gesture that this was an attack on what they see as a legislative council that's becoming increasingly under the control of mainland China. But then around 2 hours ago, they made the decision to storm into the building itself, facing really no police resistance at that time. Not only did they come in to the foyer, the lobby of the building, but they made their way up a couple of levels to where we are, into the actual debating chamber, where Hong Kong lawmakers would be due to sit again on Monday to debate bills, to read bills, to pass laws into power. So it's an extraordinary scene now to see these protesters sitting inside the debating chamber, scrawling graffiti on the walls, not just in here, but in many rooms throughout this building. I have to say that there is a lot of damage to this building as well, Hazem. Things have calmed down a little bit now, but there is a bit of nerves as well. In the past few minutes, after word has got around about that police statement that you mentioned, many people did leave this room, perhaps choosing to go to safety on the outside of the building because they are worried that the police will come into this room and clear them out. But the leaders, if we can call them that, remembering this is a fairly organic movement, this movement against what they see as a deterioration of democracy in Hong Kong, it's fairly organic, but the leaders inside this room have tried to urge the protesters here to stay put, saying that this is a sit-in, they are here for the long haul, and please don't be afraid of those messages coming from the police. But clearly some people have chosen to ignore that advice and to leave this room and to leave the building.
And Wayne, just looking at those live pictures right now and looking at the protesters, it looks pretty clear that most of them are largely young people. And that sort of backs up the sense that this is a movement that has been led by them from the beginning.
Yes, certainly. Right from the beginning, as you mentioned, when they started this protest against the extradition bill, that's how it started out, about this law that the Hong Kong government was trying to pass that would allow for criminals to be sent to mainland China for trial. The core of the protesters who have been gathering around this Legislative Council building over the past 3 weeks or so at various times have been young people, students, mainly men, it has to be said. A lot of young women as well, but mainly men who have been at the forefront of this attempt to try to put pressure on the government and ultimately force their way into this building. We saw another very large gathering, much larger than what we saw at the Legislative Council building earlier on Monday. That was a normal protest that is held every year on July 1st, which marks the anniversary of the handover in 1997 from Great Britain to China. That was a peaceful gathering. We saw on the whole, different demographics there. There were children, there were young people, there were old people, but that was largely a different event. Many people from that march did come here to the Legislative Council, but you're right, the core of the protest movement here at the government headquarters, effectively Hong Kong's parliament, have been young people. So clearly, this is a move for change in Hong Kong, being led by that youth movement.
All right, for the moment, Wayne Hay live for us there inside that legislative chamber that's been essentially taken over by those pro-democracy protesters. Let's go to Andrew Thomas now, who's out on the streets there. So, Andrew, just tell us first of all where you are and what's happening around you.
Right, well, the building that Wayne is inside, the Legislative Council, the Parliament essentially of Hong Kong, is that one right there, the dark building, perhaps 300 metres away from where I'm standing. And outside of that building, there are perhaps 10,000 protesters still massed around. Now, an hour or two ago, 2 hours ago now, before the protesters went inside, they were bashing the windows, smashing them in, but not actually going inside, because at that stage there were riot police inside the building, and it seemed as though neither side wanted to provoke a confrontation. The protesters at that stage weren't going in to meet the riot police, but nor were the riot police coming out. Now, about 2 hours ago now, the riot police who were immediately behind the glass on the ground floor of that building seemed to disappear. We're not entirely sure even now where they went, whether they found another way out of that building. It's a big complex, whether they found some other part of that complex to go to, but they seem to disappear. And that became the cue for protesters to go inside the building through the holes that they'd made by smashing their way in earlier in the day. Initially, dozens. Over the course of about an hour, it became hundreds, and it seems as though it could be in the thousands now who are inside that building. A lot of nervousness, both inside where you saw Wayne and outside, that the police might come and try and take the building back. It hasn't happened yet, but as you mentioned at the top of the programme, the police have now put out a statement, and I'll read a bit of it to you. It says the Legislative Council building, that one, was violently attacked by rioters who forced their way in illegally. The police...
At the stroke of midnight, the battle for the streets and the soul of Hong Kong was set to kick off. Umbrellas versus police batons, shields and tear gas. The joust of democracy versus autocracy. Hong Kong has become the iconic battlefield. 30 years after Tiananmen Square, these were images that Hong Kong never thought it would have to witness itself. The whole day had been such an affront to the face of the government here and the government in Beijing. The police moved in, thousands of them, locking horns with an equal number of protesters.
Prosperity and stability of Hong Kong.
It was all meant to be so different. Today, the territory's stern-faced chief executive, Carrie Lam.
Tonight, we are on the ground in Hong Kong as protests move from the streets to inside a main government building, and police use tear gas to disperse the crowds.
Hong Kong's legislature and the area around it was a battle zone today, with scenes this former British colony has never witnessed. Protesters laid siege to the center of government all afternoon, smashing its doors and windows, taunting the riot police inside. They're young and frustrated with a government they insist represents China's interests here, not theirs.
We are the future of the Hong Kong citizens, and we have to fight for our future freedom.
Then they stormed in, taking over the chamber normally dominated by government members closely tied to the Beijing leadership, spraying protest slogans on the wood-paneled walls. As the police withdrew, pro-democracy groups took the seats of power. 500,000 others filled the streets of Hong Kong today, more peaceful but no less angry about government proposals that would allow extraditions to China, a law they want scrapped. They're dissatisfied with apologies and promises to reconsider the law from Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam. Protesters demand her resignation, and even allies now question her leadership. Around midnight, police finally moved in, using tear gas to clear protesters from the streets around the legislature. And in the halls of government itself, police seemed to face no resistance from the several hundred who'd swept through. Lam herself emerged for a pre-dawn news conference where she denounced the violence and vandalism,
which really saddens a lot of people and shocks a lot of people,
but remained as defiant as ever. She offered no concessions, vowing to go after those who attacked the legislature.